On a bright, peaceful day, a crowded tavern buzzes with conversation. One patron mentions a rumor that the Tang clan's youngest daughter has entered the harem, prompting his companion to ask whether he means Tang Sowol. The bald man confirms it, explaining that she is not only exceptionally beautiful but also highly talented in martial arts. He adds that her departure is major news because she is rumored to possess the legendary poison spirit physique. His companion reacts in disbelief and asks whether such a constitution truly exists, but the bald man clarifies that the claim remains unconfirmed. He warns that the Tang clan has countless enemies, so many people may target a young woman traveling alone. However, he confidently states that anyone foolish enough to attack her will suffer terribly. Nearby, a young man finishes eating, praises the dumplings, and asks the staff to prepare another serving for him to take away. He then leaves with the wrapped food while two warriors watch him with hostile expressions. Later, the young man walks through the mountains and reflects that the rumors concerning Tang Sowol are mostly accurate. She truly is beautiful and possesses the poison spirit physique, but two details are wrong. First, she is not traveling alone. Several hidden guards are secretly following her to ensure her safety. Second, despite her rare constitution, her current fighting ability is still unimpressive. Standing before a dark cave, he wonders how he can know these things with such certainty. The answer is simple. He kidnapped Tang Sowol himself the previous day. His story began many years earlier, during an age when he had been utterly merciless. Blood Wolf was one of the terrifying titles given to him. Sword Demon was another name spoken with fear whenever tales of his brutality spread across the continent. He had first taken up a sword 10 years earlier because he was starving. Without a master or sect, he climbed to the peak of martial arts through his own strength, never showing mercy, kindness, or warmth. Before long, he became a nightmare feared throughout the land, surrounded by an ocean of enemy blood. Hunger no longer troubled him, but the resentment born from countless battles clung to him relentlessly. That should have been the final fate of the Sword Demon. His supremacy continued until a man calling himself the Heavenly Demon appeared. The Heavenly Demon swept across the martial world like a natural disaster. Sects and gangs were erased, and even the 5 great families were reduced to ruins. He became known as the strongest martial artist in history, forcing rival factions to unite merely to survive. At the end of that path of bloodshed, the Sword Demon met Tang Sowol, later feared as the Empress of the Poison Mist. She was the sole survivor of the Tang clan, while he was a man who had never possessed anything. Perhaps because they were both alone, the two quickly grew close. As they traveled together day after day, their bond deepened. One night beneath the full moon, they faced each other with unusual shyness. The young man asks sadly whether she truly intends to leave him and continue alone. Tang Sowol explains that her clan follows an absolute law. Kindness must be repaid tenfold, while vengeance must be returned 100-fold. Therefore, she cannot abandon her duty to avenge her family. Faced with her unwavering resolve and hidden pain, he remains silent and watches her with deep concern. She chuckles softly and remarks that the man he once was would have complained, asking whether some clan law mattered more than her life. He looks away and says that he already knows she would never abandon her revenge, regardless of anything he might say. Surprised by his understanding, she gazes at him for a long moment before confessing that confronting the Heavenly Demon is not merely an act of personal vengeance. She explains that with her current strength, she may be able to save at least one person. She wants that person to be him because more than anything, she wishes for him to survive. She then asks him to wait and look directly at her, preparing to reveal something she has long hidden. With a delicate motion, she brushes aside the strands of white hair covering one side of her face. A severe burn scar stretches across nearly half of it. Although embarrassed and hesitant, she does not turn away. The young man gently raises his hand and touches her scarred cheek beneath the moonlight. She immediately turns crimson at the unexpected tenderness, but before she can speak, he firmly announces that he will accompany her. Her eyes widen in disbelief. She desperately argues that he cannot come and has no reason to risk his life. However, he says that he still believes living is better than dying. With a warm smile, he adds that he could never endure living in a world without her. He promises with absolute certainty that both of them will return alive from the coming battle. Unable to restrain herself, Tang Sowol bursts into laughter and admits that she finds it ridiculous that he compared a life without her to living in a trash heap. Her laughter leaves him deeply embarrassed. After calming down, she smiles affectionately and says that until that moment, she believed she understood him completely. He calmly replies that people change with time, and that applies to both of them. She agrees, saying that they will simply have to learn about each other again from the beginning. She then places her hand gently over his. With a mischievous smile, she asks him to follow her. Confused and blushing, he asks where she intends to take him. Turning away with a lovely, bashful expression, she casually replies that they are going to her bedroom. She adds that they have many things to discuss and that speaking outside would be inappropriate. Her answer leaves him completely flustered. The memory shifts to the Tang clan pavilion, standing quietly in the forest beneath the night sky. Tang Sowol looks upward and remarks that it is finally a full moon night, though thick clouds are hiding it. She smiles and says that although every building belonging to her clan was burned to ashes, that only means constructing new pavilions will be easier. The young man repeats the word in confusion, prompting her to cheerfully confirm that she intends to rebuild them. She proposes that after everything ends, they should sit together on the roof of the new pavilions and watch the brightest full moon in the world. He responds with a gentle, heartfelt smile, overwhelmed by happiness at the promise. At that moment, the clouds separate and reveal the brilliant moon. However, the tender memory is abruptly shattered by the sight of a fatal wound piercing Tang Sowol's chest. Beneath the moonlight, she stands in a vast pool of blood while the heavenly demon coldly accepts their challenge. Heartbroken and desperate, the young man solemnly swears that he will fulfill the promise they made. Tang Sowol staggers while clutching her ruined chest. Blood soaks her clothes and spills from her lips as she struggles to remain conscious. Even at the edge of death, she offers her beloved one final, peaceful smile filled with gratitude. Consumed by rage, the young man slams his hand against the blood-covered ground where his fallen allies lie. He releases a deafening scream of hatred, vows to destroy the heavenly demon at any cost, and charges with his sword. The heavenly demon remains completely still as the young warrior leaps overhead and attacks from above. The counterattack comes instantly. A devastating force hurls the young man back into the bloody ground. Despite his severe injuries and the sea of corpses surrounding him, he struggles to stand and raises his sword once more. Yet Tang Sowol's poison, his wholehearted strike, and even their precious promise all fail to reach their enemy. As his body sinks into the enormous pool of blood created by the karma of his violent life, he realizes that his end has finally arrived. He closes his eyes, filled with regret that he lacked the strength to protect the woman he loved or defeat the heavenly demon. Then, without warning, he awakens in terror. He bursts from the clear waters of a river, coughing violently and gasping for breath. His death should have ended everything, yet something impossible has occurred. Clutching his chest, he discovers that his body bears neither wounds nor scars. He stares at his hands in complete confusion, unable to understand what has happened. For reasons unknown, he is returned 20 years into the past. Using the experience of his previous life, he quickly begins rebuilding his strength. To obtain money, he mercilessly destroys several criminal groups that once terrorized the region. Back in the present, inside the cave, he explains that his plan is to capture and restrain the young Tang Sowol before the tragedy that ruined her life can occur. He studies the girl sitting before him. She glares at her kidnapper with furious eyes, though her face is also bright red from the humiliating position in which she's been tied. He quietly thinks that she looks very different from the woman in his memories. Realizing that this is how she appeared in her youth, he notices that she is desperately trying to speak through the bamboo gag. He sighs after remembering that he forgot to remove it. He carefully pulls the gag from her mouth. Tang Sowol immediately spits aside and draws a deep breath. The young man warns that screaming will accomplish nothing inside such an isolated cave. He also informs her that she cannot break the seal blocking her internal energy. His calm explanation makes her more cautious. She shifts her gaze around the cave, assessing the situation before asking what he truly wants. She also demands to know whether he understands the consequences of making an enemy of the Tang clan. He replies that he knows their law of vengeance extremely well and asks her to stop speaking so formally. His response infuriates her. She yells that no ordinary young man speaks in such a manner and accuses him of being an elderly martial master disguised as a boy. She claims that he must have kidnapped her to satisfy some strange fetish. Turning scarlet, she then asks whether he intends to steal her purity, insisting that she noticed him examining her from head to toe. Exhausted by her absurd accusations, he quickly forces the bamboo gag back into her mouth. With a bored expression, he asks whether she has always been so talkative. Tang Sowol glares at him in outrage and growls through the gag. Attempting to clear the misunderstanding, he explains that he truly is 15 years old and that he kidnapped her only to protect her. His declaration leaves her surprised and thoughtful as she tries to determine whether he is lying. After the gag is removed again, she asks whom he is supposedly protecting her from. He admits that he does not know every detail, but he is certain that enemies are hunting her. She angrily questions who would dare harm a direct descendant of the powerful Tang clan. He says that he does not expect her to believe him immediately. However, time will eventually prove his warning, so until then, she should follow his instructions. Tang Sowol falls silent and stares at the cave wall while considering his words. He remembers that in the original timeline, she was ambushed by unknown enemies. To escape, she unleashed an extremely powerful poison that melted half of her face. Suddenly, the young girl smiles smugly. She observes that because he needs her alive and unharmed, she can use that fact against him. She warns that she is not foolish enough to trust a kidnapper's story. She promises to discover an opening and escape, adding that he will receive no ransom from her clan. The young man gives a faint, weary smile and admits to himself that he had forgotten how unbelievably stubborn Tang Sowol had been in her youth. Growing nervous, she stammers that he will regret it terribly if he attempts to force himself upon her. He merely watches her in silence. He then squats in front of her and says that he will not stop her if she chooses to run. However, he asks whether she is confident that her current, weak abilities will prevent her from being captured again. His criticism immediately enrages her. She demands to know what he means by calling her weak. He tells her to remove the seal on her internal energy first. Tang Sowol arrogantly insists that breaking such a simple restriction will be effortless. She concentrates and attempts to circulate her energy, only to discover that the seal will not move at all. Shocked, she repeatedly struggles against it. With her hands tied behind her back, she twists and moves frantically while the young man watches with his cheek resting against one hand, visibly bored. After exhausting herself and becoming drenched in sweat, she awkwardly asks him to wait another moment. He mockingly asks whether the situation is not proceeding as she expected. She clumsily denies having any difficulty, though her embarrassed voice betrays her. Eventually, she stammers and asks him to release her pressure points. He laughs and refuses, asking why he would help someone openly planning to escape. Unable to argue with his lighthearted but firm refusal, she lowers her head in defeat. Sweat gathers on her face as she realizes that she has no method of freeing herself. After a long and painfully awkward silence, she timidly asks whether she may use the chamber pot sitting in the corner of the cave. The young man responds with a completely blank expression. Outside the cave, green leaves sway peacefully beneath a sunny blue sky filled with soft white clouds. The gentle roar of a small waterfall echoes through the forest as clear water flows between the mountain rocks. Outside the cave, the young man waits with his arms crossed while Tang Sowol finishes using the chamber pot. After a while, she awkwardly calls out and asks what she should do with it now. He sighs wearily and tells her to leave it inside, promising to clean it later. Thus, the pair's first impression of each other in this new life passes a point from which it may never recover. Soon afterward, Tang Sowol sweetly addresses him as a young hero and shamelessly announces that she is hungry. He slowly turns and gives her a cold, emotionless sideways stare at the abrupt change in her attitude. A short time later, they sit in opposite corners of the dark cave, maintaining a cautious distance. He offers her fasting pills, but she complains that they do not qualify as proper food. He explains that they become edible after being soaked in water. She protests that taste is the real problem and points out that they at least had steamed buns before. The young man studies her silently before asking whether she remembers what happened when he captured her. She grumbles that he has finally admitted to kidnapping her. She then remarks that neither her hidden weapons nor her poisons worked against him. He asks how she believes he resisted the poison. She says she assumed he was an elderly master disguised as a youth. He once again states that he is 15. Tang Sowol then wonders whether he drank an enormous amount of poison-resistance wine. He asks whether she knows the price of even one bottle. She replies that 5 bottles cost roughly 1 silver ingot. Her eyes suddenly widen as she pieces everything together. Horrified, she quietly hopes that her conclusion is wrong. The young man averts his gaze as a bead of sweat rolls down his face. After gathering his courage, he admits that he brought no more food because he ran out of money. As proof, he drops his tiny, empty coin pouch onto the cave floor. Tang Sowol suspiciously asks how much he originally possessed. He answers that he had 4 silver ingots. She asks how much he spent on the poison-resistance wine. With his head lowered, he admits that it cost 2 ingots. She then asks how long he intended to remain in the cave. He answers that he planned to stay for a month. When she asks how much time has already passed, he says they have been there for 2 weeks. Unable to endure his absurd planning, Tang Sowol screams in his face and asks whether he is a complete idiot. She complains that he devoted his entire mind to martial arts and forgot basic arithmetic. He calmly responds that every problem has a solution. She sighs and tells him to stop dreaming, suggesting that he use her money instead. He counters that she should have mentioned it much earlier. Tang Sowol stares at him blankly, stunned by his shameless response. He asks where her money is kept. She explains that the pouch is attached to the back of her sash and asks him to untie her arms. He immediately refuses and says he will retrieve it himself. Alarmed, she tells him to wait, but he steps close behind her and begins searching. His proximity makes her blush fiercely and hold her breath in embarrassment. He complains that her numerous concealed weapons are obstructing him and asks for the pouch's exact location. She lets out a frightened squeal before quietly explaining that it is fastened to the right side of her lower back. Closing her eyes tightly, she endures the humiliating search and begs him through clenched teeth to find it quickly. At last, his hand closes around an elegant green pouch decorated with yellow flowers and red cords. Impressed by its weight, he comments that the wealth of the great families is remarkable. Tang Sowol collapses onto the ground in exhaustion and angrily calls him a shameless elderly pervert. He patiently denies the accusation and asks her to stop repeating it. Before leaving, he tells her that he is heading to the nearby village and asks whether she needs anything. She grumbles that he is acting generous while spending her money. Nevertheless, she demands clean clothes and a proper bed because the cave floor is unbearably hard. He listens calmly and promises to remember her requests. She then insists that delicious food is the greatest priority, complaining that the steamed buns he previously bought tasted dreadful. He replies that he thought they were good. Tang Sowol looks at him with pity and says that surviving on fasting pills must have destroyed his sense of taste. Unable to answer, he simply tells her to eat whatever she receives because she is still his prisoner. She immediately panics, apologizes, and begs him not to bring those terrible buns again. The scene shifts to the neighboring village, where traditional houses line busy streets beneath a bright sky. Disguised beneath a straw hat, the young man walks through the market and purchases supplies with Tang Sowol's money. Because he does not know exactly when her enemies will attack, he must remain extremely cautious. His plan is to hide her in the cave for at least 1 month, even though he knows she has little reason to trust a stranger. Back at the cave, Tang Sowol admits to herself that she does not entirely believe his claim that he is protecting her. However, his eyes do not seem cruel or dishonest. When he returns, she curiously asks whether he knows much about her. He thoughtfully replies that he knows something along those lines. She points out that while he appears familiar with her, she knows nothing about his life or past. She suggests that he tell her about himself, reasoning that learning more about each other would help them build trust. Her familiar words make his eyes widen. In his previous life, she had told him countless times that they should continue learning about one another. Although the mature woman in his memories and the stubborn girl before him seem different because of their experiences, the feeling remains unchanged. He smiles gently, grateful that her true self is still alive beside him. While returning through the dense forest with supplies on his back, he notices a beautiful purple flower glowing within a bush beside the path. Warm sunlight illuminates the mountain cave when he arrives. Entering, he carefully presents the flower to Tang Sowol. She studies it with a serious expression before awkwardly remarking that giving her flowers seems too intimate for their current relationship. Annoyed, he tells her to stop creating strange misunderstandings. He explains that it is a rare, poison-purifying spirit herb. Tang Sowol's eyes widen in astonishment. He asks whether she recognizes the plant capable of doubling the strength of poison techniques. She demands to know where he found something so precious. He silently recalls that, in the original future, she discovered it while fleeing from her attackers. He had intended to search for it soon, but fortune allowed him to find it on the journey back. Tang Sowol's eyes shine with excitement. He asks whether she can absorb its power. Surprised that he intends to give it to her, she questions how he knows about her poison spirit physique. He replies that it is hardly a well-kept secret. She decides that remaining suspicious of every detail is pointless by now. With a determined expression, she leans toward the flower in his hand and begins absorbing its essence. She delicately places her lips against the purple petals, her cheeks faintly reddening. Closing her eyes, she breathes in the plant's fragrance and concentrates on its energy. She then extends her tongue slightly, touches a petal, and begins chewing the herb to draw out its power. The young man silently watches as she murmurs contentedly and savors the plant. Afterward, she praises its extraordinary quality and explains that fully absorbing it will require 1 month. He is stunned by the lengthy process. In a lecturing tone, she reminds him that poison arts are not magical tricks that produce instant results. He reluctantly agrees. She then complains that consuming a spirit herb on an empty stomach causes indigestion and demands the food he promised. He immediately agrees and reveals that he brought the same steamed buns as before. Tang Sowol turns pale with disgust. She quickly forces herself to appear delighted, opens her mouth dramatically, and waits to be fed because her hands remain tied. The young man sits comfortably and feeds her with chopsticks. Unable to use her arms, she accepts each bite without further complaint. As she eats, he reflects that 1 month is a reasonable amount of time for her to absorb the herb safely. He begins considering what he should do during that period. Suddenly, his chopsticks freeze in midair. His gaze locks onto the cave entrance. Confused, Tang Sowol asks why he stopped feeding her. He quietly tells her to remain silent. Outside, leaves whirl through the forest as a suspiciously powerful wind approaches. Listening carefully to the moving trees, he realizes that the enemies he expected have finally arrived. He apologizes for interrupting her meal and orders her to begin absorbing the spirit herb immediately. Tang Sowol becomes frightened, unable to understand what has changed. The young man's expression turns cold and focused as he prepares for battle. Outside the cave, a group of armed warriors surrounds the entrance with their swords drawn. Their scar-faced leader concludes that the day of his long-awaited revenge has finally come. Harsh winds tear through the treetops above the rocky mountain, foreshadowing the deadly conflict ahead. The warriors watch the cave with cruel, disciplined expressions, waiting for their leader's signal. Eager to seize their target, they advance together. At the entrance, they find the young man already waiting with his sword in hand. He stands firmly between them and Tang Sowol, ready to defend her. From behind him, she watches with deep concern while he maintains an unwavering stance. She nervously warns that absorbing the herb now could trigger a violent internal backlash and suggests escaping first. He explains that the herb will lose potency with time and that avoiding the battle is already impossible. He tells her to absorb it while defending herself solely with her hidden weapons. Despite her fear, she chooses to trust him. He reassures her that he has a perfect plan and promises to return her safely to her home. The enemy leader steps onto the grass and approaches the cave with resentment burning in his eyes. Gripping his sword, the scarred man says he has never seen the young man before and observes that he does not appear to belong to the Tang clan. The young man calmly praises their ability to locate such a secluded hideout. The leader explains that repeatedly purchasing 2 servings of terrible steamed buns attracted attention and aroused suspicion in the nearby village. Tang Sowol remains silent. With a completely serious expression, the young man insists that the buns tasted good. The enemy leader points toward Tang Sowol and explains that his business is with her. He asks why an unrelated stranger has chosen to become her protector. He offers to let the young man leave unharmed if he surrenders the Tang clan girl. Narrowing his eyes, the leader waits for an answer. The young man remains silent, maintaining his defensive posture. Recognizing the refusal, the leader asks whether he has heard of the 100-man-slayer swordsman. The young man coldly replies that the name means nothing to him. The scarred man explains that the title once belonged to his master, whom the Tang clan killed 20 years earlier. He has since inherited the name and seeks revenge for his master's death. Tang Sowol feels a heavy chill of guilt and unease upon hearing that her family caused his suffering. The young man, however, remembers that the former 100-man slayer was a vicious murderer who slaughtered innocent people. The Tang clan's punishment had been entirely justified. Both sides remain alert at the cave entrance as the leader continues. He angrily admits that regardless of his master's crimes, the man was still precious to him. As a starving orphan, he had no family until his master gave him food, shelter, and martial arts training. He recounts that shortly before the Tang clan attacked, his master gagged him and deliberately slashed his right eye with a blade. By making the boy appear to be an innocent hostage abused by the swordsman, his master ensured that the Tang clan would spare him. The painful scar had been inflicted solely so a foolish disciple could survive. The leader explains that every warrior accompanying him carries a similar desire for vengeance. Together, they intend to repay twice the suffering inflicted upon them. He declares that grudges are unbreakable chains of hatred and asks the young man to understand his position. The cave entrance falls silent under the weight of his confession. The young man understands all too well. Human beings rarely escape revenge once it takes hold of them. There are no absolute heroes or villains, only a vast web of grudges connecting one person's suffering to another's. He grips his sword tightly, remembering the desolate end awaiting anyone consumed by that endless cycle. In this new life, he refuses to let the same tragedy repeat. The enemy leader asks him to move aside, warning that he does not wish to create another hate-filled orphan like himself. In response, the young man slowly draws his sword. A thick, sinister darkness begins dripping from the blade like mist. Black energy spreads across the ground beneath his feet, terrifying Tang Sowol behind him. The enemy warriors break into cold sweat as overwhelming killing intent engulfs the area. Their bodies tremble beneath the suffocating pressure erupting from the young swordsman. Holding the weapon with both hands, he remains perfectly still and focused. One subordinate collapses onto the ground and begins gagging from sheer terror. Even the experienced leader sweats nervously, unable to comprehend the monstrous aura before him. Tang Sowol watches from behind with equal confusion and concern. She cannot understand how someone his age possesses such immense internal power and murderous intent. His eyes glow vivid red as he resolves to crush the cycle of revenge with his own unshakable strength. Without warning, he throws 2 small spheres onto the ground before the enemy. They bounce once before exploding into an enormous cloud of white smoke. The warriors recoil in panic as the thick haze completely obscures their vision. Believing it to be poison, they shout for everyone to cover their mouths and noses. The leader takes a cautious breath, shields his face, and quickly realizes that the smoke is harmless. Within the dense screen, several sharp daggers suddenly fly toward the blinded warriors. The hidden weapons pierce multiple men before they can react. Blood sprays through the smoke as they collapse one after another onto the forest floor. The leader shouts that the cloud is merely a distraction and warns that the true attack is the barrage of hidden weapons. He desperately orders everyone to defend themselves. One warrior attempts to mock the surprise attack as useless, only for a precisely thrown blade to pierce his throat. A red-haired fighter stares in despair as his companion's blood splatters across his face. Like a shadow with glowing red eyes, the young man bursts from the smoke and charges relentlessly. The red-haired warrior roars in fury and swings his sword with all his strength, determined to strike him. The young man ducks beneath the blade and answers with a swift, precise slash, killing him before he can react. He immediately pivots and unleashes another bloody strike, cutting down a second opponent who tries to approach. Even amid the slaughter, his expression remains cold and focused, his mind perfectly calm. Overwhelmed by rage, the scarred leader releases a furious roar and attacks with his full strength. He leaps forward and brings his saber down in a crushing overhead slash. The young man blocks it instantly, and the collision sends a powerful shockwave through the area. While their weapons remain locked, the leader orders his surviving men to leave the young swordsman to him and capture Tang Sowol. The warriors hesitate briefly before obeying and rushing toward the cave. One of them tears through the forest at great speed, kicking up dust as he closes in on their target. A dense, menacing darkness pours from his body as he takes a dangerous defensive stance before her. The scarred leader studies the sinister energy and remarks that the young man clearly does not belong to an orthodox sect. He questions why someone from the unrighteous path would risk his life for the Tang clan's heiress out of mere loyalty. The young man coldly replies that loyalty has nothing to do with it. He adds that the leader would never understand his reasons, even if they were explained. The icy response makes the man step back slightly as cold sweat forms across his face. A tremendous surge of black and crimson energy erupts around the young swordsman, filling the area with an aura of death. He states that swordsmen communicate through their blades, and anyone unable to understand that language will simply be cut down. Dark smoke spreads across the cave entrance, obscuring everything outside. When it begins to clear, the young man stands imposingly inside with his sword in hand. Tang Sowol stares at him with wide eyes and an open mouth, completely stunned by the monstrous power she has witnessed. He asks why she's making such a foolish expression when he already warned her. She exclaims that no one could remain calm after seeing something so absurd. As he sheathes his sword, he explains that the technique combines killing intent with internal energy, enhancing his reflexes and physical abilities. He assures her that there is no danger of energy deviation. Tang Sowol hesitantly asks whether she can truly trust such an unheard-of technique. He answers with complete confidence that she can trust him without hesitation because he mastered controlling that power long ago. She watches him quietly, her expression softening as she begins to view him differently. Soon afterward, the two race through the dense forest, moving swiftly between the trees to escape the danger zone. Tang Sowol leaps gracefully through the air and releases a barrage of poison needles. Several pursuers are struck and collapse across the forest floor, groaning as the poison spreads through their bodies. As she continues running, she reflects that she knows nothing about the life the young man once lived. However, someone carrying such violent energy could never have known peace. Since he is risking everything to protect her, she resolves to repay his kindness tenfold. Filled with concern, she silently prays that he survives the battle unharmed. Back on the mountainside, the enemy leader charges with his saber, refusing to abandon his vengeance against the Tang Clan. The young man observes him with glowing red eyes. Their blades collide violently, showering the air with sparks as they glare at one another at close range. The impact forces both fighters backward, and they quickly reposition themselves several steps apart. The leader admits that the young man's inhuman aura surprised him, but claims his actual martial ability is merely first class. He mocks him further, suggesting that he must already feel the limits imposed by his current realm. The young man reflects that realms ultimately mean little, because a blade to the heart kills anyone. The leader scoffs and says the boy speaks as though he is capable of landing such a strike. Intense crimson energy suddenly surrounds the man's saber. The young swordsman recognizes it as saber chi, a technique different from simply releasing internal energy outside the body. It compresses power directly into the weapon and can only be performed by someone who has reached the peak realm. Despite that, he remains unmoved. By then, he has already deciphered the enemy's entire fighting style. He launches himself forward and clashes directly with the leader once more. The man unleashes a powerful slash, but the young swordsman evades it with nimble footwork. They exchange a rapid succession of brutal attacks, filling the mountain with the ringing of steel. Taking an extreme risk, the young man slips through the leader's defenses. The scarred man's eyes widen as the lethal counterattack approaches. He barely escapes by performing a backward flip. Upon landing, he grips his saber tightly and watches the young man with renewed caution. Before he can recover, the young swordsman leaps after him, his body surrounded by swirling black smoke. Their opposing energies collide in midair, producing a violent explosion of force. A slash cuts across the young man's face, drawing blood, but he shows no sign of pain. As their battle continues, several deeper wounds appear across his body. The leader wonders what could be wrong with a boy who ignores his own bleeding. After observing more carefully, however, he realizes that this is not reckless insanity. The young man is avoiding fatal strikes by the smallest possible margin while maintaining complete control over his killing intent. Their fight grows even fiercer, and each collision shatters the ground beneath them. The leader begins feeling suffocated by his opponent's relentless pressure. He repeatedly reminds himself that the boy is only a first-class warrior, yet he cannot understand why it feels as though a terrifying beast is hunting him. Despite his fear, he refuses to accept defeat. During the next clash, the force of the young man's strike snaps the leader's saber in half. The scarred warrior roars that he has already adapted completely to the boy's killing intent. He charges with the remaining fragment of his weapon and drives the broken blade directly into the young man's chest. The leader stares in disbelief. He attempts to retreat, only to discover that his body is completely paralyzed. Dark tendrils rise from the ground and wrap tightly around him while the young swordsman glares into his eyes. The leader curses him, realizing that the killing intent displayed earlier was only a fraction of his true power. The young man calmly explains that claws should remain hidden until the precise moment they are needed to tear open an enemy's throat. He tightens his grip on his sword, preparing to finish the fight. The leader desperately warns that anyone who continues using such a dreadful aura will never die peacefully. Without hesitation, the young man drives his blade deep into the man's chest. The leader coughs up a torrent of blood as his strength and life rapidly fade. The young man replies that he understands that truth better than anyone. After all, he has already died once. When the battle ends, silence returns to the mountain beneath the peaceful blue sky. Elsewhere in the forest, a heavy strike smashes into the face of one of the remaining enemies. Tang Sowol continues racing through the trees while evading her pursuers. Realizing that she has used her final hidden weapon, she begins wondering whether she will be forced to throw stones if any more enemies appear. A dry branch suddenly snaps beneath Tang Sowol's foot. Startled, she loses her balance and falls from the tree, tumbling painfully down the slope before landing in a vulnerable position. Her pursuers immediately spot the opportunity and shout that this is their chance to kill her. Tang Sowol quickly slides across the ground, trying to create distance, but panic fills her eyes as the warriors close in. Several of them leap from above with swords raised for the final strike. Trapped with nowhere left to escape, she silently apologizes to the young hero and prepares to use her forbidden poison arts. Before she can act, a spinning sword tears through the air and buries itself in one attacker's forehead. The man dies instantly, leaving his companion and Tang Sowol equally stunned. She looks upward and sees Cheonhwi descending like a demon, wrapped in dark, murderous energy. He lands violently between her and the final attacker. The warrior screams and hurriedly raises his sword, but Cheonhwi's strike is faster. One brutal slash dismembers the man before he can defend himself. Still under the influence of his terrifying combat technique, Cheonhwi slowly turns toward the remaining enemies with a cold, unwavering stare. The survivors freeze beneath his overwhelming presence. Unable to endure his murderous pressure, they collapse to their knees and lose all will to fight. Cheonhwi takes one deliberate step forward, leaving a deep mark of energy in the ground. Black smoke coils around him as he stands with his sword in hand and his eyes glowing crimson. He warns that anyone crossing the line before him will die. The men tremble and clutch their throats, barely able to breathe beneath the suffocating pressure. Firm footsteps suddenly echo through the clearing, announcing someone's approach. Cheonhwi coldly adds that even those who remain behind the line will still die. Bright sunlight shines peacefully over the green mountains, sharply contrasting with the deadly atmosphere below. At that moment, a green-robed martial artist races through the treetops with extraordinary speed. Deep concern covers his face as he desperately hopes his youngest daughter is unharmed. Tang Sowol had been raised like a precious jewel, and news of her kidnapping nearly drove him mad. Information from the Beggars sect revealed that she had been taken to this mountain. He also understood that the kidnapping was likely an act of revenge against the Tang Clan. While rushing forward, he suddenly detects the scent of blood. Horrified, he wonders whether the battle has already begun. Upon entering a clearing, he discovers several enemy corpses scattered across the ground. Farther ahead, he finds more bodies severed with terrifying precision. He notices that the first victims were killed by concealed weapons, while the others died by the sword. Sensing an intimidating presence ahead, he races toward the source of the sinister aura. When he reaches the next clearing, he finds Cheonhwi standing with his back turned amid dozens of corpses. The green-robed man silently studies the horrifying scene as dark smoke drifts around the young swordsman. Cheonhwi's killing intent resembles that of a veteran master who has spent an entire lifetime taking lives. Despite the newcomer's arrival, he remains motionless and maintains a flawless defensive posture. Breaking the silence, the man seriously asks what happened there. Before he can move again, dark tendrils erupt around him and bind his body. He is astonished by the speed of the technique. Cheonhwi turns slightly and glares at him with glowing red eyes, still consumed by bloodlust. Tang Sowol's father observes that the young man appears overwhelmed by murderous intent. He warns that revealing one's claws before judging an opponent is unwise. With a swift movement, he easily shatters the dark restraints. He again demands to know what occurred, while Cheonhwi begins to stagger. A female voice suddenly calls out, desperately ordering the young hero to stop fighting. The dark crimson aura vanishes at once, revealing the clear sky again. Tang Sowol's father watches in surprise as Cheonhwi's entire demeanor changes. Having exhausted all his strength, the young man sways and loses consciousness. Tang Sowol rushes forward and catches him before he strikes the rocky ground. She cradles him anxiously, then looks up and finally recognizes the imposing man standing nearby. It is her father. He sighs with immense relief and calls his beloved youngest daughter by name. Still bewildered by the situation, he watches as she desperately tries to wake Cheonhwi. The young man weakly opens his eyes and grumbles that he can see her clearly, asking her to stop shouting. Tang Sowol admits that she nearly died of fear after watching him fight without caring about his own life. Her father observes their exchange with confusion, astonished by the boy's extraordinary willpower. He wonders how Cheonhwi managed to suppress such pure killing intent so quickly. Seeing that her protector is conscious, Tang Sowol smiles warmly. She reminds him that he promised to reveal his name once they safely escape the mountain. Playfully complaining that not knowing it has been frustrating, she asks whether he still intends to keep it secret. Cheonhwi studies her calmly before finally yielding. He reveals that his name is Cheonhwi. The peaceful sky above awakens memories from his previous life. He remembers resting in Tang Sowol's lap at a flower-covered field during a time when their only purpose was surviving the heavenly demon's merciless attacks. Everyone had lived beneath a mist of blood. Cheonhwi wonders how long it has been since he last rested so peacefully or felt the gentle warmth of sunlight against his skin. Sometime later, he awakens in a comfortable bed with his body wrapped in bandages. Still drowsy, he wonders where he has been taken. A wooden door slowly opens, and Tang Sowol enters with a gentle expression. She smiles and asks whether young hero Cheon is finally awakened. Cheonhwi silently watches her until his senses return. He attempts to rise but immediately winces from pain. Alarmed, she urges him to lie down before his stitches reopen. Ignoring her warning, he sits upright and explains that remaining idle does not suit him. He asks where they are. Tang Sowol smiles and says there is no safer destination available. With visible pride, she welcomes him to the main residence of the Sichuan Tang Clan. The estate is vast and imposing, filled with magnificent traditional buildings. Cheonhwi surveys the luxurious room and realizes that they truly returned safely. Tang Sowol gazes at him with sincere gratitude and pulls a wooden chair beside his bed. He remarks that the battle will leave him with even more scars. She jokes that scars are medals earned by warriors. Her expression soon turns remorseful. She apologizes and says that he would never have been wounded so badly if she had been stronger. Cheonhwi listens without resentment as she lowers her eyes beneath the weight of her guilt. He gently reaches out and brushes a strand of hair away from her face. Tang Sowol freezes, her cheeks turning red at the unexpected affection. Cheonhwi points out that she also suffered an injury to her face. Embarrassed by their closeness, she stammers that she only hurt herself by falling and asks him not to blame himself. Relieved that the wound is minor, he accepts her explanation. Tang Sowol touches her cheek and quietly watches him before suddenly giggling. Confused, Cheonhwi asks what she finds amusing. She says she has just realized that their positions have completely reversed. When he fails to understand, she jokes that he is now the one being held captive inside the Tang Clan residence. She proudly announces that he will receive the finest treatment and food, ensuring he understands how miserable her life in the cave had been. Cheonhwi watches her excitement with a bored expression. He asks whether she truly understands what kidnapping means. She tells him to ignore the details. A polite knock sounds from outside. A servant respectfully informs Tang Sowol that the patriarch and head of the Tang family has arrived. The large sliding door opens, revealing her father standing with an imposing posture. He explains that he came to inspect Cheonhwi's condition and expresses relief that the young man awakened so quickly. Cheonhwi studies him carefully. The man is Tang Jinxion, leader of the Tang Clan and the renowned Poison King. Cheonhwi thanks him for the medical treatment. Tang Jinxion dismisses the gratitude, explaining that the boy's meridians and internal organs were unharmed. Even his external wounds are healing unusually quickly. He adds that Cheonhwi should instead thank Tang Sowol, who has remained in the room and cared for him almost constantly. The revelation leaves her deeply embarrassed. The patriarch instructs Cheonhwi to focus on recovering and says they will speak formally after 1 month. Flustered, Tang Sowol pushes her father toward the door and tells him to go rest. She hurriedly closes it before he can embarrass her further. When she turns around, she finds Cheonhwi watching her with an amused smirk. Realizing that she personally replaced the bandages across his entire body, he becomes even more entertained while she protests loudly in embarrassment. Outside, Tang Jinxion walks through the grand wooden corridor with a thoughtful expression. The enormous Tang Clan estate rises beneath the bright sun. Over the following days, Tang Sowol diligently continues replacing the bandages on Cheonhwi's arm. Eventually, he fully recovers and changes into a clean white robe. Tang Sowol sits beside his bed and speaks with him casually, laughing with genuine happiness now that he is healthy again. Cheonhwi smiles faintly, savoring the rare moment of peace. While walking through the garden, Tang Jinxion notices the two happily conversing through a window. A calm, proud smile appears on his face as he witnesses his daughter's joy. Later, Cheonhwi changes into an elegant black banquet robe and enters a grand dining chamber. A massive table has been covered with an extraordinary assortment of traditional dishes. Tang Jinxion welcomes him and asks him to sit comfortably, explaining that the banquet celebrates his recovery. He encourages Cheonhwi to eat freely before the food grows cold. Cheonhwi savors the luxurious banquet, reflecting that he never encountered such an extravagant meal in his previous life. Tang Sowol gently offers to remove the bones from a cooked fish for him, but her father immediately interrupts and begins explaining the proper slicing technique. Closing his eyes with satisfaction, the patriarch demonstrates surprisingly deep culinary knowledge. He then encourages Cheonhwi to continue eating before formally expressing the Tang clan's gratitude. With complete sincerity, he thanks the young man for risking his life to protect Sowol. Cheonhwi calmly replies that he did not act without expecting compensation. The patriarch smiles and reminds him that the Tang clan's ironclad law requires every great favor to be repaid tenfold. A genuine smile appears on Cheonhwi's face. He explains that he originally picked up a sword simply so he could eat excellent food like the dishes before him. Beyond that, he has never desired much. Tang Jinxion asks whether he truly has no other wish. Cheonhwi answers that if he could ask for one more thing, it would be someone with whom he could continue sharing meals like this, both now and in the future. Tang Sowol watches him silently, visibly surprised and touched by his sincerity. Her father closes his eyes and reflects on the young man's words before calling his daughter's name. She answers respectfully. Without hesitation, Tang Jinqian orders her to become engaged to young Master Qian. Tang Sowol freezes with her chopsticks still raised. When the meaning finally sinks in, her face turns crimson and the chopsticks fall from her hand. She exclaims that the decision is far too sudden, then grabs Cheonhwi and demands to know how he can continue eating so calmly. Her father asks her to settle down and explains that he is not ordering an immediate marriage. The engagement is merely a way to keep Cheonhwi close after he expressed his desire to become part of their family. He adds that the young man possesses more than enough qualifications. Flustered, Tang Sowol argues that Cheonhwi may have meant family in a completely different sense. Cheonhwi counters that his intentions were already obvious. He states that no man would risk so much for a woman he did not care about, then directly asks whether she dislikes him. Caught entirely off guard, she stammers and insists that it is not exactly like that. While Cheonhwi continues eating peacefully, Tang Jinqian observes them with a thoughtful expression. He explains that the engagement is not being proposed solely for Cheonhwi's sake. His primary concern is Tang Sowol herself. Although her poison spirit physique is considered a legendary blessing, it can also become a curse. If poison continues accumulating within her body, she may eventually lose the ability to bear children. The revelation leaves Tang Sowol deeply saddened. She lowers her head while Cheonhwi quietly studies her reaction from the corner of his eye. Her father assures her that he will not force the engagement if she refuses. Tang Sowol gently asks him not to worry. She says that her body is a precious gift from her parents and that she will never resent or regret what they gave her. Her mature response deeply moves Tang Jinqian. As father and daughter share the emotional moment, Cheonhwi watches with an awkward expression. He lightly clears his throat and apologizes for disturbing them before declaring that the problem has a simple solution. Both immediately turn toward him in disbelief. Cheonhwi explains that the poison energy only needs to be restricted and reveals that he knows a special oral formula capable of controlling its flow. In his previous life, after the Tang Clan's destruction, Tang Sowol had carried the burden of restoring her family alone. During that time, she performed extensive medical research and shared every result with him. Remembering the exact formula she once taught him, Cheonhwi begins reciting it with a faint smile. Tang Jinqian's eyes widen. As the patriarch listens, he realizes that the unfamiliar method is both brilliant and profound. A reverent silence settles over the vast dining hall. Tang Jinqian tightens his lips while processing the formula's immense importance. He formally introduces himself as the Lord of the Tang Clan. Cheonhwi calmly replies that he already knows. The Poison King explains that his position and expertise allow him to accomplish almost anything involving poison or hidden weapons. Yet despite all his power, there were still many things he could never do for his daughter. He admits that Cheonhwi has now given him another enormous debt, one so great that he cannot imagine how to repay it. Cheonhwi dismisses the matter, explaining that he merely passed along knowledge once taught to him and requires no gratitude. He looks gently toward Tang Sowol and says that she can finally stop worrying about her future. Her face brightens with happiness. She softly replies that she has already received far more from him than she deserves. Outside, sunlight shines across the blue sky, marking the beginning of a hopeful new future for them both. Once the meal ends, Tang Jinqian formally declares the banquet concluded. He explains that he must discuss a private matter with Cheonhwi and asks his daughter to leave first. In the outer courtyard, Tang Sowol cheerfully says goodbye and promises to meet Cheonhwi again later. He watches her depart with a soft smile while Tang Jinqian stands behind him with a stern expression. Cheonhwi asks what he wishes to discuss. The patriarch admits that prying into another person's past is discourteous, but he has one serious concern. He asks whether Cheonhwi has any connection to the heavenly fiend star. He repeats the question solemnly while carefully observing the young man's reaction. Cheonhwi remains silent, fully understanding the gravity of that title. The heavenly fiend star refers to a person blessed with legendary talent but cursed with uncontrollable bloodlust. It is a brutal fate supposedly imposed by the heavens, one that ordinary people cannot resist. Because of this merciless condition, it became feared throughout the martial world. Tang Jinqian clarifies that he does not believe Cheonhwi himself is the fiend. Cheonhwi says that he understands the patriarch's concern and asks whether he suspects him of learning the forbidden martial arts associated with that fate. Tang Jinqian lowers his head and confirms that this is precisely his fear. He explains that Cheonhui's aura of death is denser than anything he has encountered during his entire life in the martial world. Although he was astonished when the young man instantly suppressed his bloodlust upon hearing Sowol's voice, any failure in controlling such energy could cause fatal deviation. Cheonhwi silently listens to the patriarch's honest warning. Tang Jinqian offers to teach him the Tang Clan's internal energy techniques so he can abandon the dangerous art. He even promises to provide rare pills to support the transition. After briefly considering the generous offer, Cheonhwi respectfully declines. The patriarch asks why. Cheonhwi explains that he would rather climb the steep mountain he built through his own effort than take an easier path prepared by someone else. He adds that even if he stumbles, he will be fine as long as someone remains beside him to hold his hand. Tang Jinqian smiles warmly, understanding both his pride and determination. He confesses that he remains intensely curious about the person who taught Cheonhwi the poison control formula. Cheonhwi replies that it was simply a miracle. Recognizing that some truths cannot yet be revealed, Tang Jin chooses not to press him further. Cheonhwi promises to explain everything when the proper time arrives. The patriarch ends the conversation and instructs him to rest. Cheonhwi bows respectfully before naturally addressing him as his future father-in-law. Tang Jingqian jolts in shock. Cheonhwi looks back with an expression of perfect innocence, pretending the title slipped out accidentally. The patriarch closes his eyes and sighs deeply, unsure how to respond to such audacity. From a distance, he shouts that he is not ready to be called father-in-law. Cheonhwi pretends he cannot hear him clearly. Time passes peacefully across the vast Sichuan Tang estate. The following morning, Tang Sowol calls for Cheonhwi and complains that the sun is already high. He opens the sliding door with messy black hair and sleepy eyes. Noticing her elegant clothing, he asks why she is dressed so formally. She becomes irritated that he is barely awake and begins lecturing him. Cheonhwi merely blinks with a vacant expression, paying little attention. He teases her for accepting the title of fiancé so easily. Embarrassed, she exclaims that he was the one who confessed first. Cheonhwi calmly confirms that he did so because he genuinely likes her, then once again asks why she dressed up. Disarmed by his straightforward affection, Tang Sowol pouts adorably. She pushes him back inside and orders him to bathe and change before she explains anything. Later, the two leave the estate together and walk through the bustling streets of Sichuan. The city is lively and colorful, decorated with traditional umbrellas and hanging lanterns. Tang Sowol opens her arms enthusiastically and formally announces the beginning of their grand tour around Sichuan. Cheonhwi teases her exaggerated excitement, although inwardly he admits that he has also been anticipating the outing. She explains that Sichuan is practically her own backyard, but her future fiancé should still become familiar with it. Cheonhwi studies the surroundings with an analytical gaze while remembering his tragic previous life. Before his regression, the entire province had been destroyed by the heavenly demon. Tang Sowol soon notices a familiar merchant and warmly greets him, cheerfully asking whether business has been going well. The vendor mentions hearing that Tang Sowol had entered the harem and finds her swift return rather strange, leaving her visibly flustered. He then notices the silent young man beside her and asks who he is. Sowol proudly introduces Cheonhwi as her fiancé. The vendor's eyes widen in shock. He freezes before stumbling backward in disbelief. Sowol tells Cheonhwi not to stand there silently and urges him to offer a proper greeting. Cheonhwi stiffly steps forward and calmly introduces himself. Unsatisfied, Sowol pulls his cheek and complains that polite words alone are not enough. He apologizes and explains that he is unaccustomed to lowering his head before others. He then asks whether she is truly comfortable allowing engagement rumors to spread throughout Sichuan. She replies that spreading the news was precisely her intention. Cheonhwi looks surprised, prompting her to laugh mischievously and offer to explain his strange reaction. She teases that he must feel insecure because they are not officially married yet. He dryly suggests that she open a fortune-telling stall. Sowol remarks that his self-confidence is strangely poor and asks why he cares about public opinion after everything he has accomplished. While examining earrings at the stall, she reminds him that he risked his life to protect her and rejected wealth merely to remain by her side. She admits that his actions made her feel like the heroine of a beautiful romance, deeply moving him. She assures him that he has no reason to feel anxious because her heart has followed the same rhythm as his ever since he saved her. After putting on a pair of shining earrings, Sowol turns toward him with a radiant smile and asks whether they suit her. Cheonhwi gazes at her with such gentle admiration that he appears completely captivated. He flirtatiously remarks that her beauty prevents him from paying any attention to the scenery of Sichuan. Satisfied by the compliment, she immediately purchases the earrings. Even the vendor blushes and smiles foolishly while witnessing their affectionate exchange. The pair continue through the city while holding hands and enjoying one another's company. Later, they stop at a street stall and share a warm, delicious meal. Sowol walks ahead excitedly afterward, while Cheonhwi follows with an amused expression. By the time they return, a reddish sunset has settled over the rooftops of the vast Tang Clan estate. Sowol says she is pleased that Sichuan cuisine suits his taste. Cheonhwi explains that he grew up eating poorly and therefore never became selective about food. Remembering that he once survived almost entirely on fasting pills, she looks at him with sympathy. He apologizes again for forcing her to eat them in the cave. The two chat casually as they enter the inner courtyard, only to discover a large, noisy gathering of Tang Clan members. Cheonhwi asks what caused the commotion. Sowol suddenly remembers the importance of that day and reacts with surprise. Tang Jingqian stands in the courtyard beside several guards and a young martial artist dressed in green. Upon noticing Sowol, the green-robed man immediately turns toward her with suspicion before his expression brightens. He calls out joyfully, saying that he has only just heard about her safe return. Cheonhwi watches him with a cold, distant gaze and wonders who he is. Inside a luxurious meeting hall, Tang Eugene, the Tang family's chief escort, asks in astonishment whether Sowol truly has a fiancé. Tang Jinqian calmly confirms that the information is entirely accurate. Yujin remarks that he never expected the patriarch to surrender such an important position so easily. Tang Jinqian assures him that the decision was made only after careful consideration. He explains that Cheonhwi is 15 years old, has already destroyed an entire faction, and possesses dangerously unstable death energy. Based solely on those achievements, the youth appears ruthless and cruel. However, after meeting him personally, the patriarch discovered that his true nature was quite different. Yujin remains unconvinced and admits that Cheonhwi appeared terrifying when he saw him. Tang Jinshan smiles faintly and reflects that the dangerous sword within the boy's heart is at least not aimed at their clan. He then reveals that Cheonhwi provided the formula capable of controlling Sowol's poison spirit physique. Yujin immediately agrees that the Tang clan owes the young man an enormous debt. The patriarch explains that he offered Cheonhwi any reward he desired, but the youth refused riches and asked only to become part of their family. That request ultimately led to the engagement. Moved by the tale of devotion and selflessness, Yujin releases an impressed sigh. He calls the story deeply romantic and asks whether Sowol returns Cheonhwi's feelings. Tang Jinqian confirms that she does. Yujin remarks that almost any woman would fall for someone so devoted. The patriarch then mockingly points out that Yujin himself already has 4 concubines. Yujin suggests that after remaining alone for 10 years and raising Sowol to adulthood, Tang Jinqian might consider finding love again. The patriarch immediately refuses. Yujin begins praising his loyalty to his late wife, but Tang Jinqian cuts him off and says that far more urgent matters require their attention. The chief escort becomes intrigued by the mysterious seriousness in his tone. A knock suddenly sounds at the door. A servant respectfully reports that the captain of the Shadow Soul Squad has arrived and requests an immediate audience with the patriarch. Tang Jinqian and Yujin exchange solemn looks, realizing that such an unexpected visit must involve something serious. Back in the courtyard, the green-robed visitor waits before the clan leader. Upon reaching Sowol, he bursts into tears and apologizes for being away on a mission in another province while her life was in danger. He squeezes her cheeks and cries that she has lost weight. Sowol pouts and insists that she has not become any thinner. The man furiously declares that he would have slaughtered every person responsible for the kidnapping. She tries to calm him by explaining that all the attackers are already dead. With great pride, she points toward Cheonhwi and reveals that young Master Cheon defeated every enemy alone. Cheonhwi respectfully greets the newcomer, introduces himself, and thanks the Tang clan for its generous hospitality. Tang Jinqian explains that Sowol returned safely only because of him. The green-robed man stares at Cheonhwi in complete astonishment. He introduces himself as Tang Qiang, the young patriarch of the clan, and admits that he cannot imagine how to repay someone who rescued his beloved younger sister. Cheonhwi quietly studies him. He recognizes Tang Qiang as Sowol's older brother, the man who sacrificed everything in the previous timeline to help her escape during the Tang clan's destruction. Seeing the deep affection between the siblings finally allows Cheonhwi to understand why Sowol became so obsessed with avenging her family. Tang Qiang praises Cheonhwi's remarkable martial ability and warmly suggests that he remain at the estate to recover before returning home. Sowol awkwardly stammers that the situation is not quite that simple. Her brother looks puzzled, uncertain what he misunderstood. Tang Jinqian intervenes and explains that they have already discussed Cheonhwi's future. He reveals that Cheonhwi is no ordinary guest but Sowol's fiancée and a future member of the Tang family. Tang Qiang falls completely silent. His body begins trembling as he struggles to process his father's declaration. Cheonhwi gives him a faint, mischievous smile and says that he looks forward to their future together before naturally addressing him as his elder brother. Tang Qiang's face turns pale with panic and disbelief. He desperately looks toward his father for an explanation. Tang Jinqian calmly confirms that he personally approved the engagement. Tang Qiang erupts in protest, insisting that arranging his sister's marriage to someone they only recently met is madness. Cheonhwi casually reassures him by revealing that he and Sowol already lived together inside a cave for a month following her kidnapping. Sowol turns bright red and screams that there was no reason to mention such a misleading detail. Her brother nearly collapses from emotional shock. Tang Qiang begins crying dramatically while remembering the young Sowol who once waited excitedly for the sweets he brought home from his missions. She angrily points out that she stopped doing that when she was 12. Tang Jinqian coughs loudly to regain everyone's attention. He ends the noisy argument and announces that since all the necessary people are present, they should address the true reason for the gathering. Because the courtyard is too exposed, he asks everyone to move into the main meeting hall. Once they assemble inside, the atmosphere becomes solemn and tense. Tang Jinqian directly reveals that new intelligence identifies the demonic cult as the true force behind Sowol's kidnapping. Both Cheonhwi and Sowol react with alarm at the sudden mention of that dreaded organization. Cheonhwi becomes especially intrigued. In his previous life, the Tang clan's investigation ended before uncovering any connection to the demonic cult. Tong Yujin explains that the suspected enemies are operating in Guangdong province. He adds that the information came from the Hao clan and is therefore considered highly reliable. Tang Sowol's brother clenches his fists and urges the clan to invade Guangdong immediately and destroy the enemy. Tang Jingqian agrees, but after a brief pause, he imposes one condition. He orders Sowol and Cheonhwi to remain safely inside the clan estate. Sowol protests, insisting that she deserves to take part in avenging herself. Her father says he understands her anger but reminds her that barely 2 months have passed since the kidnapping. He refuses to let either of them exhaust themselves so soon after recovering, and explains that he summoned them only to reveal the identity of the mastermind. Sowol lowers her head in disappointment. Cheonhwi supports her and tells his future father-in-law that they should be allowed to settle their own grudge. Tang Jincheon immediately complains about being addressed by that title again. He then points out that Cheonhwi and Sowol already fulfilled their responsibility by killing the kidnappers directly involved. The remaining punishment should now be carried out officially by the Tang clan. Sowol pouts and mutters that her fiancé nearly died during the fight, so she should at least have the right to join the expedition. Her father gently calls her name, silencing her stubborn complaints. With complete sincerity, he admits that he simply cannot bear sending her into danger again so soon and asks her to yield this once. Disarmed by his obvious love and concern, Sowol cannot continue arguing. Later, while crossing a bridge with Cheonhwi, she grumbles that her father used guilt to defeat her. Cheonhwi privately thinks that accompanying the expedition would have been useful, since fighting the demonic cult might reveal information about the heavenly demon. Sowol turns toward him and asks whether he truly intends to surrender so easily. He finds her courage surprising for someone still inexperienced. She admits that she is frightened but refuses to hide from battle. She wants to become a warrior worthy of the Tang clan's pride. However, she also understands her father's love and does not want to repay it with selfish stubbornness. Cheonhwi looks at her with quiet admiration, impressed by how much she has matured. He then smiles and remarks that asking forgiveness afterward is sometimes easier than requesting permission beforehand. Taking a decisive step, he proposes a secret solution. With a daring grin, he announces that he is kidnapping her once again, this time to Guangdong province. Wol's eyes widen at her fiancé's outrageous plan. Night settles over Sichuan beneath a brilliant full moon. Silent figures move swiftly across the rooftops of a distant mansion. Elsewhere, a hatchet slams into the stone ground and cracks the surface. A bandaged man angrily complains that the group foolishly fell asleep together instead of taking turns standing guard. Scratching his neck, he asks when the Tang clan will arrive, since they were instructed to wait 5 nights. Another man tightens his metal gauntlet and tells him to calm down. He insists that he counted correctly and that their enemies should appear soon. The woman accompanying them says they must devour as many victims as possible once the trap is triggered. Back at the Tang estate, the full moon illuminates the quiet grounds. Wol places a hand over her chest and estimates that her father should already be passing through Chongqing. Cheonhwi agrees, saying his future father-in-law likely reached that area after departing in the morning. Sowol says that means the time has come for them to begin their journey as well. At the estate stables, the horses rest peacefully while a sleepy guard patrols outside. Without warning, black ribbons whip around his neck and silence him. The guard collapses unconscious as Cheonhwi and Sowol approach. She nervously asks whether they are truly doing the right thing. Cheonhwi says there is no turning back and promises to take full responsibility by claiming that he kidnapped her. His firm response leaves her surprised and faintly blushing. Wol says she dislikes watching him shoulder everything alone and promises to do her part. Cheonhwi smiles warmly at her determination and urges them to leave. Already mounted, Wol asks which horse he intends to ride. Cheonhwi calmly admits that he does not know how to ride one. She stares at him in disbelief and asks why he bothered stealing a horse. He explains that it remains the fastest method of travel and suggests that she ride in front while he sits behind her. In his previous life, horses had been far too expensive when he was young. By the time he could afford one, his martial arts had already made him faster than most mounts. Seeing no alternative, Sowol tells him to climb on. Cheonhwi asks permission before settling closely behind her. The intimate position immediately makes her stiffen and blush. She suspiciously asks whether this was his plan from the beginning. He smiles innocently and asks whether she has a problem with it. She accuses him of being sly, but when he turns the teasing back on her, she playfully asks whether he would prefer to get off. Their journey carries them toward Guangdong province, where the demonic cult's hidden base awaits. In the darkness, calm footsteps approach the enemy stronghold. Elite Tang warriors stand ready, waiting for their leader's command. Tang Jingqian asks the Hao clan informant whether the information is certain. The man swears that he would never lie to the Poison King about the demonic cult's location. He reports that the Shadow Soul Squad has already surrounded the area and recommends attacking as soon as the order is given. Tang Jincheon thanks the Hao clan for its assistance and dismisses the informant, promising a proper reward later. Once the man leaves, the patriarch turns to his commander and asks what kind of leader he appeared to be during the journey. He reflects that leading a clan is difficult because he must protect everyone, even while pursuing a personal grudge. He admits that a patriarch seeking revenge over an attack on his daughter may appear improper. However, now that he stands before the enemy's gates, he no longer believes appearances matter. The commander listens with deep respect. He assures Tang Jinxian that the perimeter will remain sealed and that no rumors of the raid will escape. The patriarch closes his eyes briefly and silently appreciates his subordinate's loyalty. The enemy compound remains quiet behind its massive closed gate. Without warning, a thunderous explosion blows the entrance apart in a cloud of smoke and debris. Cultists rush into the courtyard, alarmed by the sudden destruction. As the dust begins to settle, an imposing figure walks through the ruined gate. Tang Jinchan emerges alone, his expression filled with cold fury. The cultists freeze upon recognizing the legendary Poison King. The bandaged man stammers in confusion, unable to understand why such a powerful figure arrived without followers. Tang Jinxian declares that there are moments when appearances matter and moments when they do not. He warns that the cultists will soon become nothing more than poisoned corpses. The bandaged man groans in pain and scratches frantically at his neck. He shouts that they trusted the information they received and now face only two outcomes, returning to die or being killed by the Poison King. The woman criticizes Tang Jinxian for allowing concern for his daughter to control him. He coldly replies that people incapable of preserving their own lives have no right to comment on someone else's future. She agrees that survival is what matters most. She reveals that their original mission was to die together with the Tang Clan heiress after luring her into the trap. However, she would rather attempt escape than dissolve uselessly beneath the Poison King's poison. The cultists charge together with desperate battle cries. Tang Jinxian takes one firm step. Green poison mist erupts from the ground and expands across the courtyard in an instant. The attackers continue forward, only to realize too late that they have entered a lethal cloud. Their clothes and flesh begin melting immediately, exposing bone beneath. Within moments, skeletonized bodies collapse across the ground while Tang Jinxian watches without emotion. One dying cultist secretly ignites a thunderbomb concealed beneath his clothing. Tang Jinxian notices the burning fuse and realizes that the man has hidden powerful explosives on his body. A deafening blast erupts through the courtyard, filling the area with fire, smoke, and flying debris. The Poison King leaps backward, escaping the main radius before observing the destruction from above. After landing, he mutters that the cultists cleverly used the explosion as a distraction. Hidden by the chaos, the two surviving leaders flee. They smash through wooden doors and windows, escaping from the compound before the smoke clears. Tang Clan guards surrounding the property spot them and shout for everyone to intercept the fugitives. The two cultists charge straight through the blockade and swiftly cut down the guards in their path. As they flee through the forest, the bandaged man complains about the disastrous situation and wonders whether they will ever receive another opportunity if they retreat. His female companion tells him to focus on surviving and save his complaints for later. While racing ahead, her eyes suddenly widen at the terrifying sight blocking their path. Her foot lands in a pool of thick crimson energy that resembles a sea of blood. Both fugitives stop abruptly, frozen beneath the immense red aura rising before them. Sweat covers their faces as they realize their only escape route has been sealed. At that moment, a young swordsman wrapped in darkness descends from above with his weapon raised. Cheonhwi strikes the ground with devastating force, cracking the stone and forcing the two cultists to leap backward. Standing beside Tang Sowol beneath the brilliant full moon, he remarks that they appear to have arrived just in time. The fugitives glare at the engaged couple, stunned to find resistance along their escape route. Noticing Sowol's green clothing, the bandaged man recognizes her as a member of the Sichuan Tang Clan. He bursts into mocking laughter and says that while they were attempting to flee, their intended prey conveniently delivered herself to them. He pats his companion's back and praises her plans for always producing unexpected rewards. The woman studies Sowol and Cheonhwi more seriously. She asks whether the girl is truly Tang Sowol and whether the swordsman beside her is the nuisance who destroyed their earlier scheme. Surprised that they disobeyed the Poison King to seek revenge personally, she admits that she may have judged them too harshly as warriors. She begins loosening the red cord wrapped around her metal gauntlet, then adds that she will only retract her criticism if Cheonhwi survives the battle ahead. Cheonhwi recognizes the bandaged man as Dan Muksang, who would later become infamous as the Hungry Ghost Axe. In his previous life, Dan Muksang had been one of the demonic cult's rare and terrifying masters to reach the transcendental realm. Cheonhwi judges that both enemies currently stand at the peak realm, giving them a clear advantage in cultivation. However, he remains unconcerned. As he activates his technique, his eyes glow crimson and his killing intent floods the battlefield. He decides that overcoming such a difference in realm will not be difficult. A tremendous wave of dark red energy spreads around him, filling the area with suffocating rage. The two cultists feel the crushing pressure. The woman finally understands why ordinary warriors were helpless against him. Dan Muksang steps onto the blood-colored ground and begins enjoying the danger. Laughing wildly, he praises Cheonhwi's monstrous aura and says that the young man's energy appears even more demonic than theirs. Having taken an immediate liking to him, he suggests that they join forces instead of fighting. Cheonhwi refuses, stating that he is the Tang clan's future son-in-law and therefore an orthodox warrior. He adds that he already has a fiancée and prefers rejecting affection for men. Dan Muksang laughs at the response, tightens his grip on his axe, and charges. He mockingly declares that if Cheonhwi can truly be called orthodox, then he himself might as well be the leader of the Murim alliance. Seeing the attack begin, Sowol circulates the power of her poison spirit physique. The veins along her arms pulse as dense green poison erupts across the battlefield. Dan Muksang is surprised by the speed of her technique, but continues advancing without hesitation. He leaps into the toxic cloud and brings his axe down upon Cheonhwi. Cheonhwi blocks the blow with a precise movement of his sword. At the same time, the female cultist slams her metal gauntlet into the ground. The impact shatters the stone and sends debris flying across the area. Dan Muksang continues attacking from above with his heavy axe, while Cheonhwi uses every ounce of skill to withstand the crushing force. Sowol leaps into action and attacks the gauntleted woman. The cultist senses the incoming surprise strike and narrowly avoids a poison needle. She raises her metal guards and blocks the barrage of hidden weapons. Sowol throws after it. Sowol lands gracefully and maintains a strong fighting stance. The woman realizes that the engaged pair is far more troublesome than she expected. At that moment, Tang Clan guards arrive from behind and call for reinforcements. They stop in shock upon discovering Cheonhwi and Sowol already fighting there and demand to know why the pair are risking their lives. One guard offers to assist. Sowol immediately orders them not to approach. She explains that her control over the poison mist is not precise enough to distinguish allies during battle and warns that interference would only place them in greater danger. The Tang warriors reluctantly obey and watch anxiously from a distance. With the interruption resolved, both pairs resume their deadly clash. Inside the poisonous cloud, Cheonhwi spits the protective pearl from his mouth and drops it onto the ground. He then bites into an extremely potent purple medicinal herb, allowing its properties to make his own body poisonous. Sowol complains that he destroyed the pearl. Cheonhwi explains that the herb has made him poisonous both inside and outside. His phrasing leaves her briefly embarrassed. The female cultist begins coughing from the toxins and curses, "Sowol," while Dan Muksang grows irritated by the hidden weapons constantly targeting him. The woman concludes that Cheonhwi is the greater obstacle because he continuously blocks their attempts to reach Sowol. She warns that the Poison King will soon catch up and suggests killing the swordsman first. Dan Muksang replies that accomplishing that will not be simple. His companion complains that Cheonhwi appears to possess only first-class cultivation, yet offers almost no openings. Dan Muksang laughs beneath his bandages and declares that the young man's absurd killing intent does not frighten him. Cheonhwi silently remembers why this particular enemy remains so vivid in his memories. His paralyzing aura only affects opponents capable of feeling fear. It is nearly useless against lunatics who charge forward like rabid beasts without concern for their lives. The two cultists advance together, coordinating their movements to break through the couple's defense. The woman concentrates enormous physical strength into her gauntlet. Her punch releases enough wind pressure to tear a path directly through Sowol's poison mist. Sowol stares in shock as the force opens a hole in the toxic cloud. The blow then destroys a large rock while Cheonhwi narrowly leaps away. Fearing for him, Sowol calls out to her fiancé. Cheonhwi quickly regains his position. He emerges like a shadow, his red eyes shining as he prepares to end the battle. Their techniques collide in midair, illuminating the darkness with violent energy. The female cultist coughs blood after being struck by an overwhelming and mysterious force. Dan Muksang ignores the pressure and charges, mocking Cheonhwi that such a trick will never work on him. Cheonhwi remains unmoved and channels his dark energy into his sword. His blade collides with the heavy axe, scattering sparks across the yard. The two exchange an intense series of rapid strikes, filling the area with the ringing of metal. Dan Muksang soon notices something deeply unusual. Cheonhwi moves around him like a ghost, attacking and evading from nearly impossible angles. The cultist becomes increasingly frustrated as he tries to understand the unnatural youth before him. Cheonhwi remains extremely close, constantly moving along the edge of the axe's effective range. Dan Muksang realizes that instead of striking the blade directly, the boy repeatedly attacks the handle to conserve strength. Such perception resembles the instincts of a transcendental master. Furious at being outmatched technically, he roars and swings with all his power. During the collision, Cheonhwi's sword cuts across the man's chest. At the same time, the axe tears diagonally through Cheonhwi's robe and flesh, leaving his chest bleeding beneath the shredded black fabric. Dan Muksang examines his own wound and smiles maniacally, pleased that Cheonhwi's cut appears shallow. Cheonhwi raises his dark sword calmly. Unable to understand his confidence, the cultist glares at him. Cheonhwi remarks with an amused smile that even without using his killing aura, Dan Muksang cannot defeat him in pure skill. He adds that the man already lost to him in exactly this manner once before. With one swift and merciless movement, Cheonhwi delivers a precise finishing strike. The powerful cult master collapses lifelessly. Sowol stares in astonishment as her fiancé defeats him. The remaining woman screams furiously and calls Cheonhwi an interfering scoundrel. He immediately turns toward her. With a single accurate counterattack, he cuts her down and sends blood spraying through the air. She coughs violently as poison from the blade spreads instantly through her body. Moments later, both cultists lie dead across the ruined courtyard. Sowol observes from atop a shattered rock. Looking up, Cheonhwi sarcastically compliments his fiancée's dramatic position. Silence returns to the battlefield beneath the dark clouds covering the night sky. The bodies of the demonic cult leaders rest in pools of blood, ending the threat that had plagued the region. Sowol jumps down from the rock and runs toward Cheonhwi, asking anxiously whether he is truly unharmed. She notices the wound across his chest and becomes alarmed. He dismisses it as non-fatal and explains that he deliberately accepted the injury while remaining within the limits he could endure. Sowol scolds him, saying that his calculations do not excuse such recklessness, especially after he behaved similarly during their previous battle. Cheonhwi assures her that nothing serious will happen. While he begins explaining how his technique improves his perception, she angrily squeezes his cheeks and complains that he never admits when he is wrong. She declares that arguing with him is pointless and orders him to let her examine the injury. Ignoring his insistence that he is fine, she moves closer and presses her head against his chest. Cheonhwi freezes completely at the sudden intimacy. His face turns red as he stammers and asks what she is doing. Sowol ignores his embarrassment and gently licks the blood around the wound. She explains that allowing it to scar would be unsightly and reveals that she applied a special healing poison with excellent medicinal effects. Cheonhwi covers his burning face and asks how she can perform something so embarrassing without hesitation. He reminds her that numerous people are watching. Sowol blushes and insists that it was merely medical treatment and should not be interpreted strangely. Suddenly, a dense and terrifying dark green aura rises behind them. Tang Jinqian emerges from the shadows with a furious expression and demands a complete explanation of everything happening before him, including the scene he just witnessed. Cheonhwi and Sowol freeze in terror, their faces turning pale. Cheonhwi quickly promises to explain and addresses him as his father-in-law. Tang Jinqian immediately orders him not to use that title. Crossing his arms, the Poison King waits sternly for their excuses. The engaged pair kneels with lowered heads. Tang Jinqian asks whether they understand that secretly escaping the estate and placing themselves in mortal danger cannot simply be ignored. Cheonhwi accepts responsibility and says he persuaded Sowol to follow him. She interrupts and insists that she chose to come willingly. The patriarch says that her answer disappoints him even more because it means Cheonhwi knowingly brought his fiancée into mortal danger rather than protecting her. Cheonhwi listens tensely to the reprimand. Recognizing the seriousness of his reckless actions, he bows deeply and sincerely apologizes for acting alone and disregarding the patriarch's wishes. However, he firmly adds that his love for Sowol is the one truth he will never compromise. He promises that no matter what danger awaits them, he will never allow the worst fate to befall her. Hearing Cheonhwi declare his love so openly before her father, Sowol turns crimson with embarrassment yet feels deeply moved. Tang Jinqian releases a long sigh and remarks that his future son-in-law certainly knows how to talk his way out of trouble. He orders the pair to rest and recover, explaining that the Tang clan will remain in Guangdong for several days to settle the remaining issues. Cheonhwi asks what still needs to be done. Tang Jinqian reveals that they captured one member of the demonic cult alive and intend to interrogate him. Although the leaders were killed and the prisoner may possess little valuable information, the attempt is still worthwhile. Cheonhwi narrows his eyes, immediately recognizing an important opportunity. He addresses Tang Jinqian as his father-in-law once again. The patriarch asks what he wants, noticing the sudden seriousness in his tone. Cheonhwi firmly states that he must be present during the interrogation. Both Tang Jinqian and Sowol stare at him in confusion, unable to understand his reason for insisting. Night deepens over Guangdong beneath the full moon. The courtyard of the Tang clan's temporary residence remains deserted, while the clan leaders prepare for the secret interrogation below ground. A wooden staircase descends into a dark, damp basement where the captured cultist is held under heavy guard. Inside the interrogation chamber, an elderly white-haired man sits tightly bound. Drool runs from his mouth, and his vacant, deranged expression reveals the effects of the demonic cult's brainwashing. Tang Jinqian receives Cheonhwi and says the prisoner's condition matches his earlier prediction. He explains that demonic cult members possess mental restrictions that render ordinary interrogation useless. Cheonhwi nods and confirms that he understands exactly what has been done to the man. Tang Jinqian says he will question that knowledge later, then grants Cheonhwi permission to attempt breaking the restriction. Cheonhwi approaches the prisoner and places a hand against his forehead. He remembers that the demonic cult, lacking proper strength in the past, relied on bizarre heterodox techniques to impose such restraints. The mental lock combines two methods: a poisonous insect that inflicts unbearable pain whenever the victim attempts to reveal secrets, and a hypnotic suggestion that embeds commands directly within the mind. To unravel it, Cheonhwi must force his internal energy through the proper acupoints and guide it through all three dantians in sequence. He concentrates and sends his energy into the prisoner. Blood suddenly pours from the old man's eyes, nose, and ears as the restriction violently shatters. Cheonhwi withdraws his hand and coldly announces that the process is complete. The prisoner coughs a large amount of blood onto the floor. Cheonhwi warns that he directly disturbed the central region of the brain. The man will retain clarity for no more than 15 minutes before either dying or losing his mind entirely. Knowing time is limited, Tang Jinqian steps forward and demands the prisoner's name and rank. The old man stammers that he is Yo Nung Hak, commander of the Black Dogs within the demonic cult's divine sect. Tang Jinqian is stunned that the method succeeded when even his truth poisons had failed. He is even more surprised to learn that the captive is a unit commander. He immediately asks why the demonic cult targeted the Tang Clan, particularly Sowol. Yo Nung Hak weakly explains that they learned she could become a serious obstacle to a certain person's grand plan. Tang Jinqian asks whether the order came from the cult leader. The prisoner denies it and reveals that Dan Mugsang and Samasu Ryan acted independently. Cheonhwi listens closely, connecting the names to memories from his previous life. Tang Jinqian leans nearer and demands an explanation of the mysterious grand plan. A grotesque smile spreads across the prisoner's blood-covered face. He reveals that the goal is the complete destruction of the Miram and the creation of a blood-soaked world where everyone lives only to pursue vengeance. Tang Jinqian sighs and remarks that the endless madness of the accursed demonic cult has apparently awakened again. Cheonhwi remains silent, already knowing which question matters most. He remembers Samasu Ryan as the Phantom Eye Witch. In his previous life, she had been thin and physically frail, which explains why he failed to recognize her earlier. The heavenly demon's desire to destroy the martial world matches his memories, yet several details differ from the previous timeline. Cheonhwi asks permission to question the prisoner once more. Tang Jinqian allows him to proceed. Stepping closer, Cheonhwi looks directly into Yo Nung Hak's eyes and asks which realm the demonic cult's leader has currently reached. Bleeding heavily, the prisoner struggles to answer that the sect leader has already entered the supreme demon limit. Cheonhwi absorbs the revelation with a grave expression. The supreme demon limit is equivalent to the legendary Harmony realm, a level of power beyond ordinary understanding. Outside, cold night settles over the empty streets of Guangdong. Inside the basement, blood continues dripping onto the wooden floor. Yo Nunghak finally lowers his head and dies while still bound to the chair. Tang Jinqian confirms that the prisoner has stopped breathing and expresses relief that they managed to extract so much information. Cheonhwi asks what he intends to do about the demonic cult. The patriarch smiles faintly and remarks that his son-in-law appears eager to watch him take action. He admits that he would gladly attack the cult, but they lack solid proof that the entire sect participated in the plot. Their only realistic option is to inform the Muram alliance. Cheonhwi listens to the political reasoning and acknowledges the difficulty of the patriarch's position. He falls into thought while Tang Jinqian watches him from the corner of his eye, fully aware that the young man conceals many secrets. Tang Jinqian turns toward the exit and calls Captain Yom. The captain immediately answers from outside. The patriarch gives him only a slight nod. Understanding the unspoken command, Captain Yom bows and leaves the interrogation room without question. After passing through the curtains separating the chambers, he departs, leaving Cheonhwi and Tang Jinqian alone. The patriarch says he previously decided not to investigate Cheonhwi's origins too deeply, but now requires an answer to one question. He asks how Cheonhwi knew about the cult's mental restriction when even the Tang Clan's intelligence network had never discovered it. He adds that an excuse involving rumors overheard in an alley will not be convincing. Cheonhwi admits that such an explanation would indeed fail. Tang Jinqian says he does not personally distrust him, but warns that an outsider would reasonably suspect a connection between Cheonhwi and the demonic cult. Before reporting the intelligence to the Muram Alliance, he needs the truth to prevent unnecessary misunderstandings. Cheonhwi stares at him solemnly. He realizes that the moment has arrived to make a dangerous decision. Explaining that he returned 20 years into the past sounds absurd, yet with the demonic cult and heavenly demon already moving, he can no longer afford to remain silent. He asks Tang Jinqian to believe everything he is about to reveal, no matter how impossible it sounds, because every word will be true. Recognizing his seriousness, Tang Jinqian nods and prepares to listen. Cheonhwi closes his eyes, draws a deep breath, and attempts to speak about his regression. However, the moment he tries to begin, his body freezes. Tang Jinqian waits with his arms crossed. As the silence continues, the patriarch notices Cheonhwi's discomfort and calls his name, confused by his sudden hesitation. Cold sweat pours down Cheonhwi's face. He realizes that his mouth is locked and that he cannot produce a single sound. His heart suddenly pounds with violent, agonizing force. Overcome by panic, he clutches his chest and staggers. Tang Jinqian approaches and asks what happened. Cheonhwi gasps desperately as an invisible pressure constricts his throat. Although his thoughts form the words clearly, something buried inside his subconscious blocks him from speaking them. Horror fills his eyes as he realizes that an external force is controlling his mind. The only logical explanation is that someone placed a mental restriction upon him. Such restraints require complex mental manipulation and should be impossible to apply without his awareness. He wonders who created it, when it was implanted, and how he failed to notice. He even considers whether an unknown technique erased the memory of the event. Tang Jinqian firmly grips his shoulders and orders him to focus, breaking him free from the panic. Cheonhwi apologizes and explains that the words became trapped in his throat. Tang Jinqian tells him not to force himself to discuss something so painful. Cheonhwi solemnly promises that his past will never endanger either the Tang clan or Sowol. The patriarch accepts his oath and says he has already exhausted his injured son-in-law for too long. He orders him to rest. Cheonhwi bows slightly and leaves the basement with a deeply disturbed expression. The temporary residence returns to silence, leaving his sealed memories and unanswered secrets hanging over the night. Later, dressed in white sleeping clothes, Cheonhwi sits alone on his bed. His mind was already burdened with countless concerns, and this impossible discovery leaves his thoughts even more scattered. He circulates his energy and thoroughly inspects his body, but finds no physical abnormality. He concludes that even advancing to a higher realm would not allow him to remove the restriction, because the seal activates only when he attempts to speak about his regression. Its creator must possess authority far beyond that of any human martial artist. Cheonhwi wonders what kind of divine being could send a person back through time. Perhaps this forced silence is the price and karma for defying the laws of heaven and receiving a second life. He clenches his teeth and closes his eyes, reluctantly accepting that he may have to carry the truth alone forever. The sudden sound of his door sliding open interrupts his thoughts. Sowol enters wearing a light white sleeping robe, her expression shy and hesitant. With blushing cheeks, she gently asks whether her fiancé has time to speak before sleeping. Cheonhwi is startled by her boldness and warns that entering a man's room so late would provoke a terrible reaction from her father. Sowol explains that she waited for him all night and became lonely when he returned directly to his room without greeting her. Smiling triumphantly, she asks whether that answer satisfies him. Unable to argue, Cheonhwi apologizes and admits that he should have visited her earlier. His mind was simply too crowded to think clearly. She asks whether the interrogation ended badly. He replies that it went well, although answering her honestly is unexpectedly difficult. A wounded expression appears on Sowol's face as she asks whether he truly refuses to tell her what happened. Cheonhwi assures her that he trusts her completely. He merely does not want her worrying over a harmless matter and promises that he is in no danger. He gives her a gentle smile, attempting to ease the tension. Sowol silently studies his expression and sincerity. She reaches out, rests a hand on his shoulder, and lovingly calls his name. Then she settles comfortably onto his lap and moves close enough to leave him completely startled. Tenderly stroking his face, she remarks that a wound in the chest can easily be healed with poison, yet no poison exists that can remove the anxiety buried in his heart. She finds it ironic that even with the poison spirit physique, which allows her to accomplish miracles through toxins, she cannot cure the pain troubling him. For a moment, Cheonhwi sees the woman from his previous life before him, with white hair and a terrible scar across her face. Moved by her concern, he gazes at her tenderly and blushes faintly. He wraps his arms around her and remarks that the person he intended to comfort somehow ended up comforting him instead. Cheonhwi asks her not to worry because he needs her, not her abilities. Simply seeing her alive gives his heart hope. Sowol playfully says she enjoys seeing him express his feelings. He counters that nothing is more expressive than her climbing into his lap immediately after becoming his fiancée. She smiles happily, her cheeks flushed with affection. Sowol moves even closer until almost no distance remains between their faces. Growing nervous, Cheonhwi asks whether she drank something and remarks that she seems unusually intimate that night. She maintains a mysterious smile and softly calls his name. Still seated in his lap, she directly asks whether he is seeing another woman whenever he looks at her. Cheonhwi freezes completely, stunned into silence by the unexpected question.